Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud with the legendary artist Charles Banks Wilson. We're going to be showing some interior shots of your studio. What makes your studio such a good place for you to work?
Well, I'm kind of isolated up here on the hill, and I guess there are an awful lot of people in Arkansas think of me as kind of a usurper or something of the sort, but I was born in Springdale, Arkansas, and lived there for 6 months because my mother wanted to be near her family when I was born, and so my father, who was in World War I over in Europe, wasn't expected home for, I think, almost a year and a half. But anyway, he got out early, came back to Oklahoma, came over to Arkansas, got his wife and 6 months old baby, took us back to Oklahoma, and I never left.
But you do have Arkansas roots. And looking at your studio,
I've got lots of relatives here.
That's good, and and lots of fans, we might say as well. And looking at your studio, I can't help but wonder: would another artist come in and feel at home in your studio, or does each artist need to make his or her own space?
I think each one makes their own nest, and I think there's more truth to that than poetry.
You've actually done self-portraits of yourself working in a studio, and in one of your famous self-portraits you show a streak of paint across your hand. How important is that detail to the painting?
Well, I wanted to do something that was truthful, and had it been more truthful, I would have had a red streak across my forehead from wiping my head when I was in doubt about whether I was doing a good job or not.
Well, you have your artist's apron on today, and I see different colors. You have your whole palette represented on your apron here.
If I didn't put an apron on when I'm painting, I probably would have paint all over my leg.
As an artist, do you feel an intimate connection to the tools of your art? I know you've said that coloring with grease crayons is a sensual kind of experience.
Well, that would be the lithography, and I started that when I was in Chicago going to school. And I love to draw, and lithography is a drawing medium. I remember having one teacher tell me something that I've remembered and passed along, and that is, when you're drawing, think painting, and when you're painting, think drawing. But drawing gets in there in both instances, and I think that was one of the reasons that turned me to the lithography, as well as the fact that you could make multiple copies. And students in the school were very interested in what I did, and I used to sell my prints right off of the press for maybe $1 a piece, and I would sell lots of prints and think, my goodness, how long has this been going on? Now those prints that they bought for $1, I'm shocked to see, are worth $2,000 and $3,000.
Wow, that's good.
In fact, I've told many people when they said my things are kind of expensive, I say, yes, they're too expensive for me to own.
How did you come to do your self-portraits?
Well, Charles Ford of the Oklahoma Senate said that they would like to have a portrait, self-portrait, and I was against it. I didn't want to do that. Someone said, well, a lot of artists do self-portraits, and I said, yes, and there are an awful lot of conceited artists. But I decided that if I did it of me working on the murals, it might be passable. I might excuse it. So I did it with me in the foreground and a figure of myself on a ladder working on some figures in the murals.
Did doing a self-portrait cause you to see yourself in a new way?
I would love to see myself in a new way, but unfortunately, I did make my hair darker. But as I said, I was the artist, and I could do anything I want to do.
Well, it's a great self-portrait, and you've done others. One called Carrie's Dad.
Oh, well, that's true. I did do a lithograph, and the reason I called that Carrie's Dad is I was out in western Oklahoma at an Indian agency, and when I walked in the door, the women behind the desk stood up and said, "We know who you are." And I thought, well, sure you did. I'm famous. And she said, "You're Carrie's Dad." So I thought that was a great title for the portrait.
It's a great
And then
one.
I did another little painting of myself when I was going to teach portraiture, and I thought I'd better do something. And as I posed cheap, I did myself.
When we've been visiting back and forth on the phone and in person, you've used a phrase that I just love, the pigments of my imagination. And I wonder, as an artist, do you see everything, everybody with an artist's eye?
No, I think I see everybody as with a human eye. I mean, to isolate it to art now defeats me, because I've been seeing, being called an artist often, and now I'm hesitant to ask people to not call me an artist, call me an entertainer or something, because I'm so aware of the newspaper reporting on hot check artists and escape artists and striptease artists, and today, I mean, yesterday's paper came out with an article about a fellow who is a groundskeeper for the golf course, and he said that what he was doing was art, not maintenance. And he said, I am an artist. And I thought, I want to be called something else now. Like I liked it when I was illustrating books, and they would introduce me as an illustrator, because then people know what you are. But if you're called an artist, they don't really know what you are.
Good point. We looked at the Capitol portrait that you did of Will Rogers, looked at some studies you did of Will Rogers. You have a wonderful portrait you've done of Will that you were just like 15 years old when you did that.
Yeah.
Tell us how that came about. You actually got to spend some time with him.
Well, my father was a musician and played in the pit orchestra of the theater, and made arrangements for me, because he knew how I had admired Will Rogers. And every young boy in Oklahoma was an admirer of Will Rogers. The fact that Will was part Indian, that he could spin a rope, which I could do, things like that. And so I related to him a great deal. And Dad knew of that, and knew when Will Rogers was coming that I would like to draw him, because I drew everybody else. And he was on stage, and I got in the wings, and I started drawing. And Will Rogers was supposed to be at the theater for 30 minutes, because he was making a tour of the country, and as it was, the audience kept him for 2 hours. So I had 2 hours to draw Will Rogers.
Well, it's a beautiful, beautiful portrait. You've also got another famous portrait here, one of Thomas Hart Benton, and tell us a little bit about that, because it's a fascinating story behind it.
Well, the story behind the painting itself was the fact that his wife selected me to do his portrait, because she had known of my admiration for Tom Benton, and she said, Tom is ill and can't work on his Truman Library mural, and this would be a good time for you to come and paint Tom, which I did. But Tom and I had been good friends for a long time, and Tom used to complain when I was doing the portrait that I was sure hard on him as a model. And I said, well, I'm getting back at you for all the hard times you've given models over the years.
And you're the only person who ever drew him from life, is that correct?
As far as I know, I don't know of anyone besides myself who ever did Will Rogers from life. But maybe some people just haven't been as gutsy as me.
Was it intimidating at all for you to be drawing Benton simply because he is such a famous artist and had been like a mentor to you? Were you ever thinking, oh gosh, I want to get this just right?
Perhaps that was the case. For the most part, I think I had to be true to my own ability and wasn't really concerned about Tom.
Have you worried a lot about the art critics?
No, I've never been important enough for many art critics to pay much attention to. But I remember one time going through a gallery, and an art critic was making a talk about the work on exhibit there, and he came to my work and he started describing why I had done this and why I had done that. And that was all amazing to me. I didn't do any of that. So I think maybe many art critics think of themselves more as writers than people of truth.
The reason I ask, you did a cover for Collier magazine of an art critic.
No, that was just an illustration.
An illustration of an art critic.
The cover I never did finish because I was drafted to come back to Oklahoma and be checked to go to the Army. They felt I was more important in the writing for the newspapers about the treatment of the American Indians during World War II.
But I can't help but think, looking at this illustration, that you had fun drawing an art critic.
Oh, I'm sure, that's right, yeah. I have fun drawing everybody, as far as that's concerned. People ask me, why do I pick certain subjects?
Right.
And that's one of the mitigating circumstances. I think it will be fun.
Yeah.
But I want to say at this point that I don't paint for other people. I paint for me. And when people come along and say that they like what I've done or something, or don't like what I've done, it doesn't make much difference to me one way or another. Because the subjects I choose are subjects that I think I would like to do. But the other influence is I'm very influenced by design. I think design is what separates the men from the boys in art. And I will select subjects that I think sometimes they tell a story that I feel like needs to be told. Or I do it because I think it will be fun, or I think it has good design possibilities.
Well, not only have you done portraits of very, very famous people, you've also done portraits of people that we need to celebrate. And I thought you might tell us a little bit about your book, Search for the Native American Purebloods. This is a wonderful book.
Well, that's sort of like Topsy sort of growed. I was my studio was there on downtown Main Street, very accessible. And a lot of Indians, knowing that I was painting Indians, would come up to the studio to see me. And I would see somebody who was a tribe that I'd never drawn, and I'd say, well, gee, you're a Southern Chippewa or something of the sort. I've never drawn, would you pose for me? And I would make these drawings and throw them in a box. Until one day I noticed that I had drawn a lot of different tribes. And I went down into Lower Oklahoma to draw, and it was known that I was there. And a reporter came up to me and said, if you just had one more thing to do in your life, what would you do? And I thought, well, that's kind of a foolish question. I don't know. But I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, I would continue to draw the Indians, but I would select the ones that were purebloods, all of one tribe. And that's what sent me off on the tours to all over Wyoming and Colorado and Nebraska and so forth, looking for what would be a pureblood of that tribe.
It's a beautifully illustrated book, and I love what you had to say in the book. In your afterword, you write, people often speak of the intensity of seeing for the first time. I am certain the intensity of seeing for the last time is greater.
Well, that's a kind of a sad commentary, because so many of the tribes that I did were of people who were the last pureblood of the tribe, like the Winnebago, picked the last man of the tribe. I remember drawing another man who was the last man of the Delaware. And while I was drawing him in this, because he didn't want people to know he was posing like this, so he took me to an empty house, and we sat in a room that just had one window, and that window was coming in, and he probably visualized he was posing for a photographer, so he was afraid to blink. And in so doing, his eyes were wide open during the whole session. And pretty soon I noticed him kind of slooping a little bit in the chair, and I said, "Are you tired?" And he said, "Yes, I think I'd like to rest." And he gradually sunk to the floor, and I thought, oh my God, I've killed the last Delaware. But he was just mesmerized by the light coming in the window.
Of course. I want you to tell us also about this wonderful painting of the Sioux.
Well, he was here visiting some of the wealthy Oklahoma Indians, and he was from out in South Dakota. And he came with his wife and daughter, and I remember vividly that she sat on the floor and beaded moccasins while he posed, and his daughter sat on the floor and read comic books. But I worked a little longer on him than I normally do, but he, being a Sioux, didn't speak English, I understood. So I would tell his wife, who spoke English, and she was a full-blood also, I would tell him if I wanted him to sit still or to move or he could rest, and I'd tell her. She would in turn tell him in Sioux. Until the last day, after about a week or so, why he came up to me at the doorway as he was leaving and said, "Have you got 50 cents?" And I thought, here I've been speaking pidgin English to him for 2 weeks, and he speaks better English than I do.
While we're in your studio, we want to take advantage and show some of the wonderful paintings you have here and portraits you have here. And one that immediately comes to mind is this beautiful painting, the World War II painting.
Well, that was something I did for the Office of War Information when I was doing that instead of carrying a gun in World War II. But the thing that impressed me so much about the Indian at that time was more Indians volunteered for service than any other minority in America. And I felt that some way or other I could put it down in a drawing that would be understood. So I did a lithograph of the American soldier with the flag, and in behind him I made drawings of the great chiefs who had been, in my opinion, great generals. In fact, most generals who had at times whipped the American army. But so when I did the painting with the American flag of the time, I put each of these chiefs, like Sitting Bull, Geronimo, Pontiac, Osceola, in behind him, because I felt this was the American heritage of the American Indian.
Yeah, exactly. You've said that one of your favorite paintings is Totem.
Well, that's a favorite painting of mine, which was done almost all with a palette knife, because that old thing had been sort of American, sort of adamant, sort of withstanding all the fire. But I think probably the best painting I've ever done is the one I did of the Quapaw. And that one I was motivated to do by the fact when I went to Little Rock, Arkansas, they were telling me about the Indian heritage of Arkansas, and they were talking about the Osage. And of course the Osage were an important tribe, but the Osage, if the Osage had not had the Quapaw to fight them, the Osage would probably prevented any whites from inhabiting the state. But the Quapaws are the ones who really protected the state of Arkansas. And I came back with the idea of doing a pure-blood Quapaw. And there were only three left, one woman, 2 men. And the Quapaw that I did was a double cousin of my wife. And so her family was able to get this fellow, whose name was Ed Quapaw, to pose for me. And I think that's probably the best thing I've ever done.
Is it hard for you to let your paintings go after you do a painting that means so much to you?
No, it isn't difficult at all, because I just think of people who buy my paintings as buying the right to take care of them, that they still belong to me, and I don't think if you owned one of my paintings, you'd say, "This is my painting of such and such." You'd say, "I own a Charles Banks Wilson."
Do you go and visit your paintings?
No, I really don't, but I'm always glad to see them again, like a relative.
I love the painting, Getting Ready to Dance. Tell us about what it was like working on that painting.
Well, that was, and people do ask me, why do you do certain paintings? What motivates you to do this subject instead of that subject? But of course, I was raised among 13 Indian tribes, and to me, Indians were just like everybody else. And it wasn't until I went away to school in Chicago, and the students would all want to know about the Oklahoma Indians. And I had really never thought of the Indians as being any different than anyone else. But I think I probably was moved towards the Indian subject by my fellow students in Chicago. And this particular painting was, I saw the Indian dancer related to the dancers of the what I want to say, who had certain dances on the stage, and I felt that the Indian dance was so unique, and I was doing Indians in those sort of ballet poses. But in this instance, I had come back late at night to my room in the Y Hotel in Chicago, and somebody had put a chair out in the hall, and I saw the beauty of that chair and its contours, and then I related that to a composition of Indians dressing. And so if you look at that painting with the chair and then repeat it for the Indians dressing, and then I drew them as the ballet stars rather than native people of Aborigines backgrounds or something of the sort.
I asked you earlier off camera if you've ever thought about doing an autobiography. You've done so many interesting things. You've met so many outstanding people like John Steinbeck and Langston Hughes.
Well, have I thought about a biography? No, not really, because I've always considered that the pictures I've done are really my biography, and I can't improve on that.
So you think of yourself as a storyteller through your pictures?
I do. I think of myself as a storyteller, and I don't think of myself primarily that way, but I do feel like that there have been many things that I'm privy to that maybe other people are unaware of that need to be spoken of. And as I'm not a writer, I'm an artist, I saw it too. And I think people recognize situations maybe better from pictures than they do from the written word. You know, after all, we were painting pictures historically long before we were ever writing, and maybe even before we were ever talking. We were drawing hieroglyphics or whatever.
Well, you've certainly known a lot of great writers. You've painted a lot of great writers. How did you get to know John Steinbeck?
Well, I knew John Steinbeck in New York because a friend of mine had given a party for people who were into Oklahoma. And of course, he had done Grapes of Wrath, and the main reason he came to the party was because Woody Guthrie was there, and he loved Woody Guthrie and what Woody Guthrie stood for. But everyone that was there were people who were either from Oklahoma or had lost money in Oklahoma, and so this was a party of Oklahomans. And I'm sure, as I said, John Steinbeck was there. John Steinbeck was going through America in his travels with Charlie. And a lot of movie people and people like that would come up to the studio, because many people, such as I can't think of his name right now, who is an artist. A lot of people are movie people, actors are artists, and they love to paint. And I remember Anthony Quinn and I came back from Santa Fe on the train together, and we became friends for the simple reason that he knew of my relationship to Thomas Benton, and he wanted me to introduce him to Tom Benton. So it wasn't my drawing card at all. But one thing or another have been, Langston Hughes was a very special friend, and I think that his stories and his feeling about his people was enviable. I remember he told me that he probably was the only person who was ever elected to his profession by his 6th grade class, that they were selecting officers for the class, the president of the 6th grade class and the secretary and so forth, and one little blonde-headed girl stood up and selected and nominated Langston Hughes to be the class poet, because Negroes all have great rhythm. Oh. And Langston told me, he said, I couldn't carry rhythm in a bucket.
Well, he certainly was a great writer. You also know members of the Van Gogh family.
Well, yeah, that was just something where Vincent van Gogh's nephew, and everyone's familiar with Van Gogh's painting of the apricot tree. Mm-hmm. Well, this man who was taking me through the St. Louis Art Museum, no, it was the Kansas City Museum, they were having a big show of Van Goghs, and he was there with the exhibition. And he was just the epitome of Van Gogh, looked like him, dressed like him. And he took Tom Benton and I think probably Edna and Tom's wife through the show, which was quite a treat.
Another painting we must talk about is the wonderful portrait you did of your daughter, Carrie.
Well, she was 8 years old then, and she posed for it and was bored through the whole time, but was a wonderful model, and people such as Alexander Hogue of Tulsa thought it's the best painting I've ever done. And I had a good model. Models make a lot of difference. Some people have criticized some of my drawings in the Native American book as not being as good as some of the other drawings. And I said, well, some of my models weren't as good as them all the same. And I pretty much draw what I see. But I don't draw their face unless I see a good design in it.
So far we've been talking primarily about your canvases. What was it like to recognize or realize your artistic vision in a mural?
Well, that was a young man named, and various people have taken credit for it, but it was a young man named Joe Mountford. And Joe Mountford wanted me to do paintings of, let's see, sequoia. Oh, but by the way, it might be interesting for you to know that the painting in the Oklahoma Capitol of Kerr was done because Kerr had died. And I was to do a painting of President Kennedy. But I was already committed to do a portrait of Kerr. And the woman who was going to do the painting of Kennedy agreed to do it for nothing. And I knew that Kerr would never stand for them paying me $10,000 to do his portrait and doing Kennedy for nothing. So I didn't do Kennedy, which is one of the bad things that I've done in my life. But anyway, those paintings were done because the alcoves in the Capitol had been done for sculpture. But sculpture would be so expensive that about 50 years later they decided to have portraits of them.
Well, Mr. Wilson, it's been a great honor visiting with you today. Thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.
Jackie Cooper Volvo supports numerous community projects and is proud to be a sponsor of Writing Out Loud.